Thank you. Please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum. Mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Tonight we have Mr. Ian Sibley, I believe, with us, who is
good evening,
our
Chair.
good evening, our independent member. To my left is our clerk, Jill Hollyoak. To my right, we have Councillor Adrian Chapman-Law, who's the Vice Chairman, and Richard Jones, who is our Deputy Monitoring Officer. Very shortly, the Monitoring Officer will be joining us online. And we also have, to my left, Councillor Nanovo, Councillor Canavan, and Councillor West. Right. Sorry, Gavin. So welcome, and also to our members of public that are here tonight, and to those of you joining on live stream. I believe that we will also at some point have Councillor Toby Slade joining us, I believe, to make a statement. So if I can move on to agenda item number 1, apologies. Are there any apologies, please?
Thank you. Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Eleanor Connolly, Councillor Dwayne Farr and Paul Cashmore. Item 2, substitute members. Councillor Canavan is here for Councillor Connolly and Councillor Wright is here for Councillor Farr.
Lovely. Thank you very much, and very warm welcome to our substitute members. I really do enjoy it when we do have substitute members, so that it gives a broader understanding of standards and how we work to the other members of the council. So you're very, very welcome here. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that you wish to make at this stage, please? No? Excellent. I'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of January. Are members here happy that we approve these minutes? Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you. Seconder? Lovely. All in favour? Yeah? Lovely. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 5 is public issues, and I believe that there are 2 public questions from Mr. Alex McKinstry and also a public statement. I'd like to invite Mr. McKinstry to come to the table, please, and to give your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so the question 1, this relates to the review of Code of Conduct complaints, which is item 6 on this evening's agenda. Complaint BCP 177 was submitted by me on the 4th of April 2024. Having received a reply from the subject councillor, the committee decided to ask the councillor for further information, and that information was requested on the 3rd of June 2024. Has the councillor now provided that information, and if so, has it been forwarded to the committee? Can I also ask whether the subject councillor has at any point sought extra time to provide this material, and if so, what time frame were they given? The information was requested 254 days ago.
Thank you, Mr. McKinstry. Before I respond, I would just like to welcome Councillor Sarah Armstrong, Councillor Patterson West, and our monitoring officer Janie Berry, who are now joining us online. Thank you. So, Mr. McKinstry, in response to your question, whilst the Standards Committee publishes preferred timeframes for the progression of complaints, there are occasions when the process does fall outside of the same. In adjudicating complaints, the Chair of Standards Committee, in consultation with the independent persons and members of the committee, consider each case on its own merits, and on occasions this may result in extended timeframes. It is unfortunate that this particular complaint is taking an exceptional period of time. However, it is important to respect the complainant and the subject counsellor's right to a fair investigation, and that all evidence received is carefully reviewed. We are hopeful that this complaint will be determined in the very near future. Thank you.
Okay, second question. Again regarding BCP 177, this complaint was scheduled to be dealt with 2 meetings ago on the 8th of October 2024, but the committee took the view that as there had been correspondence between the subject counsellor and officers, it would be worth allowing the committee to see that correspondence prior to making any determination. Has that correspondence been made available to the committee so that they can potentially make a determination this evening? I ask this because the report for item 6 states, at paragraph 10, the committee must determine what course of action should now be taken to conclude the matters set out above. 315 days have now elapsed since this particular complaint was made.
Thank you. And again, I refer to my previous response, and we are hopeful that this complaint will be determined in the near future. Thank you. Yes, please, Ms. Kinstry, would you read out your statement? Thank you.
Okay, and the statement relates to BCP 176. And the committee may recall how the member was going to be referred to full council for refusing to apologise for disrespectful conduct. The item 6 report states that prior to full council, it's on the 3rd of November to be precise, the subject councillor provided the apology complying with the remedy. It is a fact, however, that the remedy imposed by this committee was that the councillor apologise within 14 days of the determination, in other words, by the 17th of June 2024. The councillor's apology was not made until 139 days after that deadline, and 149 days after they told this committee, in writing, that they would not be apologising or complying with the sanction. In my view, the member should have been named at full council for this long-standing controversy, which breached Part 8.4 of the Code of Conduct and breached the member's own declaration of office.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKinstry. Now, Councillor Toby Slade, I believe, was going to join us online to present his statement. Is that correct, Jill?
Yes, I believe he was hoping to join online. I'm not quite sure in relation to which agenda item this was. I'm imagining it is to do with the consultation.
Yes, I believe it is in respect of item 6. So perhaps we'll give him a little bit of time, but if he doesn't, if he's unable to join us online, because I have his statement here, I'm happy, if members are okay with that, to read out the statement, because I think it's important that if somebody's gone to the trouble of writing a statement for us, that we should hear that. So I shall, if he's not able to join us in line, I'm very happy to read out that statement.
Last night I was chatting just after I think he spoke to you. I thought he told me that you were going to read it out for him and that he wasn't going to be here, but that was just conversation.
That's fine. I will ask the officers to begin to present this item, and after their presentation, then I will read out that statement. Thank you.
Brilliant.
So if I may defer to the Deputy Monitoring Officer or the Monitoring Officer to please present item number 6, the Code of Conduct Complaints Review. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce this report. It's the standard report, item 6, starts on page 11 of your agenda pack. It provides an update on the progress of complaints we've received, gives an indication of, as usual, in terms of the time frame that we've received, the complaint, the nature of the complaint, and the current status of each complaint. There are some that were with, and as indicated with the independent investigator, we've received the reports, but not in time to get them onto this agenda, so they will be presented to the next scheduled meeting. In response to a question at a previous meeting, it wasn't actually the last meeting, it was the one before, you agreed as a committee, following a suggestion, to indicate where a councillor is found to have potentially breached the code, that we indicate which provisions of the code have been upheld in terms of the complaint or dismissed. So that's now reflected in the table. Other than that, Chair, the report's for information.
Thank you very much. Before we go into questions, I will read out the statement made by Councillor Toby Slade. As councillors, we are entrusted with the responsibility of serving and representing our communities with integrity, professionalism and transparency. That trust is not just limited to our official duties, it extends to our conduct at all times. Recently, concerns were raised regarding the behaviour of a fellow councillor. Whilst these matters don't directly relate to official council business, they have the potential to impact the reputation of BCP Council and, more importantly, the trust residents place in us. As elected representatives, our actions, both in and out of office, reflect on this council and the people we serve. Even outside of formal duties, the decisions we make can have far-reaching consequences. It is therefore crucial that we uphold the same level of accountability in our professional conduct as we do in our personal conduct as we do in our professional roles. In the private sector, employees are often held accountable for actions outside of work that harm their employer's reputation. Public office should be no different. The credibility of BCP Council and the trust of the public are not things to be taken for granted. Our behaviour, whether in an official capacity or not, shapes the community's perception of this council. The situation raises a pressing issue. Should BCP Council's Code of Conduct be reviewed to ensure it addresses instances where the behaviour of public office holders risks damaging the council's reputation? The public rightly holds us to a higher standard, and our code should reflect the realities of modern public service. Public trust is fragile. Once lost, it's difficult to regain. That is why I believe we must take this opportunity to ensure our standards of conduct are robust, fair, and fit for purpose. Only through strong accountability and transparency can we truly serve the best interests of our community. Let's work together to protect the integrity of this council and the trust of those we are here to represent. So that's from Councillor Toby Slade. Thank you. As members will be aware, I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Armstrong. As members will be aware, the code that BCP Council has adopted is a national code that was agreed between various member bodies, including the ministry, ministers, members of parliament, councillors, council officers, and members of the public and the LGA. And this was, it was introduced back in 2019, and BCP Council have adopted that with a couple of very minor amendments to that code of conduct. You will notice that in the next item on the agenda, there is currently a consultation running, which all councillors have been encouraged to complete, and which we will be discussing tonight. So the code is currently under review, and we're very fortunate that we have representation on the review panel from this council through our monitoring officer, who will be feeding back to MHCLG and the LGA. But these things do take time. One of the things that we were very careful to consider when drafting the original code was that members should be able to have a personal life. And I have spoken to Councillor Slade about this as well, that how important it is that, for example, you know, you can go to a football match and enjoy yourself and maybe, you know, call out some names and things like that. And not feel that you're going to be held accountable for that as a councillor, or that you could, you know, go to a wedding and have a few drinks and somebody doesn't accuse you of bringing the council into disrepute because you might have fallen over on the dance floor. It's very important to be able to have a private life as well. But I do agree with some of the essence of Councillor Slade's thoughts on that. I will now ask members, please, if you would have any questions for our Deputy Monitoring Officer on item number 6, our Code of Conduct review, and the cases that are still pending, bearing in mind, of course, that this is a public session and specific details of those cases cannot be disclosed at this meeting. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I firstly wanted to commend Councillor Toby Slade for taking the time to write his statement, and I think especially given that he's one of our newest, he is our newest councillor, so I think that was really positive that he's taken the time to look into the Code of Conduct, and I think it's a good reminder. With regards to the pending complaints or the investigations, is it possible to just have a bit more understanding about the time frame for when those complaints will be concluded? Thank you.
Deputy Monitoring Officer, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The report outlines that we've had 2 of the reports, the final reports from the investigator. Forgive me, I should have actually looked at the date of the next meeting, but that will be brought to your next meeting for consideration in due course. So if someone's got that, I think June 29th of April for those. We are hopeful to have we're in constant conversation with the investigator around the other complaints, and it's hopeful that we will get copies of those again for that meeting. If not, then it will be the meeting after, but we're in the hands of the external investigator. With regards to other pending complaints, we've had a few, and you'll see on there that they've been recently lodged. There's a few complaints that have been recently lodged. They are currently with the subject councillors for comment, and we will be scheduling a consultation meeting with the chair and members in due course, and other pending complaints will also be reported to that consultation meeting. So I can't give you an exact time, but probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks we should have a consultation meeting scheduled.
Okay, thank you. But I think taking Mr. McKinstry's point about the time frame, I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you, Richard, for that explanation.
Thank you. One of the other things that we're also hoping to do before the next municipal year begins and our next standards meetings start is to ensure that we have a review of our current procedures around complaints, and this will be discussed amongst the committee. We're going to have a full review of this, but one of the things that I hope that we will see come out of that is a shortening of these deadlines, so that the cases that we have, like Mr. McKinstry has drawn attention to, and some of these other ones that are going back to summer of 2024, those timeframes are shortened, so that we're not sitting there waiting for hundreds of days for these to conclude, because it's not fair on the subject councillors, and it's not fair on the complainants either. Ian, I see that you have your hand up, please.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I just want to support Councillor Armstrong's point of view about these delays. My feeling is that if the time limits are not realistic, then don't use them. I can understand a member of the public getting totally frustrated with these delays. That's the only comment I would make as an independent person.
Thank you. Richard, is there anything else that you require of us on this matter, on this item at the moment?
No, the report is for information. I mean, obviously, if you wish to take other action in relation to any complaint, then we can take that forward. But the report recommendation is to note the report.
Ian, you still have your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
My apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else, any comments to make at this stage? Yes, Councillor.
I would just like to say further to Councillor Slade's statement, I think most of us on this committee would agree with him that the standards need to be upheld. And these are some items, well, we've discussed this for the last year and a half, really. And so I don't think anyone on this committee would be disagreeing with this statement.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, we did also have a presentation from one of the independent investigators that clearly set out, with the help of the LGA guidance, when members are considered to be acting as councillors and acting as members of the public. And I found that very helpful to have that guidance as well from an independent investigator who was actually responsible and came along and presented one of his investigations for us. Okay, so the recommendation is to note the report. I'm happy to propose from the chair. Seconder to note that the report be noted. Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. Any dissension from that? No. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So we will move on to agenda item number 7. Now, this is our MHCLG consultation, which is strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. We have a deadline of the 26th of February to put in a consultation response. Now, this has been sent round to all members of the council, and I sincerely hope that all members of the council have completed this, and if they haven't, I will actually ask that the monitoring officer or deputy monitoring officer please send a reminder to members if they could please complete this. Tonight I would like to know whether you would like to put in a formal response to this consultation as the Standards Committee. Now, I have actually responded to this personally myself as a councillor and also or in my capacity as chair of the Standards Committee. But would you, as members, like to put in a agreed formal response as Standards Committee to this MHCLG consultation? Oh, sorry, it's the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, yeah. Councillor Canavan.
Well, yes, I think we should, but there may be some difference of view about what the response might be, Chair.
Well, what we would do, if members are in agreement that you wish to put in a formal response as members of as BCP Standards Committee, because we're actually in quite a privileged position to have a standards committee. Not all councils have a standards committee, so I think it's really important that as bastions of holding up our code, that we should be putting in a response to this if members are in agreement. And what we'll do, and what I will ask our monitoring officer to do, who's waiting patiently online here for me to shut up, is we will go through each of the questions which we can answer as a committee, because there are a number of questions that you can only answer as individuals, like have you ever been subject councillor to a complaint or put in a complaint. But as a committee, we can formalise an agreed response to each one of these questions. I don't think it will take us very long. If you're happy to do that? Yeah, lovely. Monitoring officer, welcome. Hello, lovely to see you.
thank you.
And would you like
Thank
to
you, Chair.
start taking us through these, and they're not too onerous, questions which form part of this consultation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The committee did have the opportunity to start considering this consultation document at our last meeting, and I note that the minutes do capture some of the initial thoughts and observations that came out from there around overall sort of more broader aspects of the code. So as you've quite rightly outlined, MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, issued a consultation document on the 18th of December, and we've provided the full copy of the consultation document for members to consider as an appendix to the report that's before the committee this evening. You're quite right in that a lot of councils do not have a standards committee. Some I've experienced have the standards work incorporated into the agenda for an audit committee. Some just don't have a standards committee, and they just deal with, the monitoring officer deals with complaints and works with independent persons and a nominated elected member. And in other councils where there are standards committees, some have a politically proportionate committee, whilst others disregard the need for political proportionality and ask for one representative from each of the recognised political groups. So there is no consistent standard approach to managing code of conduct arrangements and the ethical governance framework by a standards committee within across councils. This council, you quite rightly mentioned, has adopted the model code, which was issued and circulated by the Local Government Association. This council has kept very closely to the wording, so we've adopted rather than adapted the model code, as we have stuck quite rigidly to it. However, some of my colleagues up and down the country, they have either councils who have chosen not to adopt the code, they have replaced the code with their own local code, and some have adapted the model code in quite considerable fashion to make it a lot more local and offer much more flexibilities. And you will see that as we go through the questions, one of the consultation questions posed is, should there be a consistent code across all local authorities, or should there be a degree of flexibility to represent local issues? One of the strengths of feeling about having a consistent code, and this is something that as a committee we may have to consider as a future work programme, is managing the ethical governance framework, i.e. code of conduct complaints for parish and town councils. We have a few parishes and one town council, and you'll be familiar from the previous item that we do manage the complaints that arise from, for example, our town council. However, depending on the outcomes of the community governance review, we may have a lot more parish and town councils, and this committee would then be responsible for adjudicating on the codes of conduct for potentially many more parish and town councils across the geographic boundary of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So for anybody who becomes dual-hatted, i.e. you sit on a town council or a parish council as well as being a BCP councillor, having one consistent code is much easier to work with, rather than trying to remember which code applies to which position when you're in, depending on which form of council meeting that you're in. So I hope that helps with the background. I don't wish to repeat the comments that are in the minutes. They're recorded quite accurately, but of course Richard and I could build those into any form of response that the committee may wish. The consultation itself, if I may just go to the appendix which is attached to this report, is broken down into a number of sections. Firstly, in section 4, it confirms who MHCLG would like to hear from. As you quite rightly pointed out, I am a member of the MHCLG consultation group for monitoring officers. When we last met during January, they had received hundreds of responses and were hoping to receive many more prior to the closing date. However, we can respond as individuals or as a committee.
In section 5, I think, Chair, if we may, and start from that section, it's about strengthening the standards and code of conduct framework. Initially, they're asking around the mandatory minimum prescribed code of conduct. And I think if we start at question 2, the question really is, should the government prescribe a mandatory minimum code for conduct in local authorities in England? Yes, no, if not, why not? Again, if you have some views on this, Richard and I can insert those views into our responses. And we then reflect on question 3 and question 4 around whether there should be a degree of flexibility. I have to say, amongst my colleagues, there's kind of a mixed response in respect of this. And in question 4, it is around the requirement to cooperate with investigations. As you've just heard in both our public statements and contributions, and also you've seen from the complaints report as well, some of our complaints are taking quite a little bit of time. So it may be that if the government prescribed a code of conduct for investigations requirement, that government may include some mandatory timeframes in there. Can't guarantee they will, but it may be something that they're considering as part of question 4. Chair, I'm not quite sure how you want me to deal with this, but whether you want to just address those 3 questions in the room first and seek some views.
Yeah, I think we'll just ask these 3 questions of our members of the committee and see how we get on and whether we have a consensus. I'm aware that Councillor Eleanor Connolly, whilst not here tonight and whilst being represented and substituted by Councillor Canavan, she has sent some thoughts of her own, and I would assume that Councillor Canavan will also be representing those thoughts as well. I would also like to add that with regard to having a unified code that everybody uses, not only is this easier for members of council to understand, on the officer's side, if you are an officer who is working as our deputy monitoring officer used to in a area where there are multiple parishes, hundreds of parishes, that if each parish adopts its own code, it's a nightmare, because if you get a complaint come in, you've got to measure that against each parish's code. So our monitoring officers are incredibly hardworking and incredibly overworked. And to have to then deal with the possibility of having 100 different code of conducts that they've got to look at for each parish within their area, it's just impossible to do, which is why, again, the model code was introduced. Councillor Wright.
Does a town council have to have this body oversee its complaints, or could it deal with them on their own? It has to be this one.
Monitoring officer?
Chair, through you, the parish and town councils have to have their codes of conduct considered by this standards committee or by me as the monitoring officer for the principal area. So they don't have the ability to, unless the government changes things as part of this consultation exercise going forward. My current understanding is there's no plans to change that, but currently I have to oversee the code of conduct arrangements for all parish and town councils that we have. And that means that any investigations would get reported to this committee for final adjudication.
Thank you. And it is also law under Localism Act 2011 that each town and parish council must adopt a code of conduct as well. Right, so the question that is, before we go on to questions, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I was just listening to that. I don't think that good conduct should be a postcode lottery. So I think it should be, consistent across the different levels of governance, whether that's relating to staff, councillors, and our residents. I think just because you live in one part of a parish, I think you should expect good conduct from your public officers, regardless. So I would be supporting anything that would have like consistency and certainly ease for our monitoring officer as well.
Thank you. So going back to section 5 of the consultation, which is strengthening the standards and conduct and looking at the mandatory minimum prescribed code of conduct. The question is, do you think the government should prescribe a mandatory minimum code of conduct for local authorities in England? Yes, no, or something different? I'm seeing a lot of nodding. So if I say that the answer to that question looks like it's going to be yes, is there any dissent to that? No? That's great. Everybody happy online?
Chair,
Fabulous.
just for the record, it's the independent person speaking. I've already responded to this back in December, and I did agree with the decision that you just made as a committee.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so we've done one question. Excellent. So question 3 is, if yes, do you agree that there should be scope for local authorities to add to a mandatory minimum code of conduct to reflect specific local challenges? Yes, it is important that local authorities have flexibility to add to a prescribed code. No, a prescribed code should be uniform across the country, or unsure. Councillor Canavan.
I think it depends. It depends a lot. Sorry, that's my headphones. I'm sorry. Can you hear that? Yeah. Is that better? Thank you. I can't hear and talk at the same time. That's the trouble. I'm going to put that in my pocket and see if it makes any difference. No, it doesn't work in there, does it? Okay, try again. Hopefully it won't whistle this time. I think it depends really on what is intended by local flexibility. I mean, the monitoring officer might have some better examples of the way in which that has been applied elsewhere. I think if there is a prescribed, national kind of mandatory minimum, what is it? What's in my head? What is it that the local flexibility is seeking to do? What else is it seeking to do? Is it seeking to be more prescriptive? Is it seeking simply to be able to adapt the way in which it deals with complaints, or the way in which it deals with these things? Or I don't understand what that local flexibility aspect could be.
Councillor Chapman?
I've got some thoughts on that. I mean, they're saying sort of minimum. So to me, that means absolute bare bones. This is to ensure that people, there is something there that is relevant and has some teeth and all the other stuff. But we don't, because I mean, obviously this is quite vague in its wording. So we don't know. We don't know what could be. We don't know what this minimum code could be. It could be based on what's there, or it could be something that's stripped down on what the LGA says at the moment. So I think to say no would be and deny us any flexibility at all. I think would be foolish with not knowing what yes means. So I would prefer to go with yes on this one if we have a choice.
Councillor Wright.
It seems that if you answer yes to the first one and answer yes to the second one, they seem to cancel each other out. You say one says you want to prescribe to one across the country, the next one says you want to be free to be flexible and change it. So therefore, then the first one's not set across the country. Is that not what that's saying? Seems to me that if you impose flexibility on your code of conduct and you can change it and add things and take things away, then it's not the first one, which is a code of conduct across local authorities in England.
My understanding would be that you wouldn't be able to take it away because it'd be the prescribed minimum. but then you could
It says
add
it's
to
not
it.
clear,
And what
is
I'm
it?
going to do is I'm going to ask the monitoring officer if she has some ideas of what local flexibility to add to a prescribed code, what kind of examples she could think of. Thank you.
Oh, gosh, I'm really struggling. I am really struggling. And when we had our consultation meeting, there weren't very many examples coming forward of this. I would imagine it could be around, for example, the code of conduct could include some elements where councils don't want to be very prescriptive about the definition of respect, for example. So some councils don't have some of the definitions in their code. It could be around the role of the monitoring officer, around the adjudication process and complaints coming in. It could just insist that all complaints go to an elected member, for example. For example, a person in your role, Chair. When there are, however, some concerns that if you have too much flexibility, that the code could itself become quite weak and undermined. And so I think it's more about, if you don't have something robust, is it going to be toothless going forward if you have quite considerable poor conduct amongst your elected members, or you have an example of multiple alleged breaches? Could the code itself be so localized that it becomes undermined and it becomes kind of toothless and lacks its sort of credibility?
Thank you. Councillor Canavan.
I'm just thinking that, sorry, I can't stop there. Just thinking that if you have what's set out in question 2, a mandatory minimum code of conduct, let's suppose the government comes up with one, kind of have to imagine what that might include. So if it's a code of conduct, it will set out what that means, what kind of levels of conduct it would expect. But I would also imagine that it will also set out what you should do about it, what local authorities should do about it. I mean, I was quite surprised, if I'm honest, to learn that not every council has a standards committee. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if in response to all of this, the government says, yes, this is going to be your mandatory minimum code of conduct, but also in dealing with issues that come out of that, you have to have a standards committee or something to be able to deal with it. So that's where I think the aspect of local flexibility might arise, in the sense that if the government say you have to have a mechanism to deal with it, then it might be that different local authorities might choose a different method of dealing with it. But what's key is that there is a method of dealing with it, and that what can't happen, in my view, is any kind of watering down of that national minimum standard.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson-West.
Hiya. For me, this one, I've gone a bit between the yes and no, but the more I've thought about it, the more I actually think no. I think there's a real issue that things could become very unwieldy if people were to add to this. If you think we've already gone through periods of time where we've had quite significant numbers of complaints, I think the more we add to it, the more scope there is for this to become unwieldy. To be able to keep on top of it and manage the complaints, we've already seen from Councillor Armstrong the issues with the pending numbers that we have. To actually be able to work through these in a viable way, I think it has to be kept kind of relatively tight. I don't like the idea that if you step out of area, the expectations on your councillors would be vastly different. So if you went between BCP and Dorset, for example, that what you expected of a councillor in BCP would be vastly different to what you might expect in Dorset. I think our residents should have a really consistent approach where they understand that their complaints will be dealt with to a minimum standard, and that standard is across the board. So I've definitely kind of very much shifted personally towards the no there.
Thank you. So I think that it very much depends on what's in the minimum code, because if you start, I mean, if the minimum code works to the same kind of model code that we've got now, then that's not so bad. And don't forget, we're talking about the code of conduct and not the procedure rules around it, which is very different. Our procedure rules are prescribed within the constitution of each council, and they are very different because it depends whether you have got a standards committee or not. And it is important to remember that the code is based on the Nolan principles in public life. That's where it's all started from. And yes, I agree with you, Councillor Canavan, that we should be looking, I think, nationally at all authorities having a standards committee, and that's harking back to pre-2011 and pre-Eric Pickles, and I know that Richard and Janie will both remember how it was back then, and it was quite unwieldy, but we also had better sanctions, and that's something as well that we're going to come on to at the moment. What I wouldn't want us to do is to say, no, we don't think that it's right to be able to embellish the code if we find out that the prescribed code is toothless. That's my only concern. I would like to have the option there because we don't know what the bare minimum is going to be. If the bare minimum is a robust code, happy days. But even with the robustness of the model code, which took a long time to get to be adopted, and a lot of work from the focus groups, BCP Council did make, I think it was 2 very, very minor changes, which we wanted to do. And it was just really, really minor ones, I believe, wasn't it, Richard? But we as a council agreed that we wanted to make that change. Because it suited us and it suited the way that we work. Now, we wouldn't be able to do that if we say no. So that's why I'm probably going to vote for yes. And now I think with that, conscious of the fact that we've got a lot of questions to get through, I'd like to vote on this. So if I could see hands for the yeses, please, the yeas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 on 9. That's it. Sorry?
Yeah.
Sorry, did I count you, Richard?
Vote on 9.
Sorry?
Only voted you in the room.
Yeah.
Oh, of course we can. Yes.
Take their views on board.
But we will take your views on board. But anyway, by looking at it, it looks like everybody is in agreement that, yes, we will agree to say yes to question 3. So we will move swiftly on to question 4, which is, do you think the government should set out a code of conduct requirement for members to cooperate with investigations into code of conduct breaches? Yes, no, or something else?
Just yes.
I think that's a resounding yes from everybody. Lovely, thank you. Janie, did you want to take us through to the next section?
If I may, the next section looks at the Standards Committee process itself. As you know, the Localism Act requires us to have at least 1 independent person. Personally, I prefer 2 or 3 independent persons to be available to support the committee. I think that provides flexibility for the Standards Committee. It allows for any potential conflict in extremely complex cases, and I think it is better representative of a reasonable person or member of the public to express those views as well. Some standards committees also have a number of co-opted members. It is common to have co-opted members, especially where you have close working relationships with parish and town councils as well. So co-opted members tend to be, in my experience, appointed by a collective of parish councils, and they represent the views of parish councils, so that when we undertake that adjudication exercise, parish councils definitely have a voice. However, the difficulties are that independent persons, as you know, and co-opted persons do not have the right to vote, and that is just left with the elected members from the principal authority. So I think, Chair, I'm right in assuming that in question 5, does your local authority currently maintain a standards committee? I think we can skip over that question And perhaps question 6, because I think in commentary, I think I've heard members of the committee indicate that you seem to support having a standards committee, and so we don't need to look at that. But I think if we focus on perhaps question 7 onwards. Question 7 is around the start of looking at alleged code of conduct breaches, which are referred for investigation. Should the decisions be heard by the Standards Committee? Should local authorities have discretion of how to allow decisions to be taken by full council, or you're unsure? I think we have a comment in our minutes from the last occasion. I think it was Councillor Patterson West who made comments around this, about perhaps decisions being taken by full council could become quite bureaucratically difficult. It could extend timeframes. It could become quite political and quite divisive. I think those were some of the comments the councillor made in our previous meeting. Currently, we have decisions which are taken by the Standards Committee, who is our who represent our centre of excellence, I think, on our ethics code at this moment in time. Question 8 asks the committee to focus on the role of the independent person and co-opted members. Should they have a right to vote and offer their objectivity and have that registered and recorded formally within decision making? And then in question 9, I just wanted to raise this. Some councils do have independent chairs. So even currently, they have chosen for that additional objectivity to have an independent chair of a standards committee. I can't tell you whether it's very common or not, but I have experienced that on 2 occasions in my monitoring officer career. Question 10 is a free comments box. So any observations that you make during the debate on this particular section, Richard and I can take notes, and we can feed those back to MHCLG Chair.
Thank you very much. So let's start with question 7. In most principal authorities, code of conduct complaints are typically submitted in the first instance to the local monitoring officer to triage before referring a case for full investigation. Should all alleged code of conduct breaches which are referred for investigation be heard by the relevant principal authorities standard committee? Yes, decisions should only be heard by standards committee, or no, local authorities should have the discretion to allow decisions to be taken by full council. So I'll open this up to the floor.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, that one. I don't remember seeing that when I went through and did it myself online, and I can't remember what I said either. So I think sending stuff to full council would be horrible. Full council can be interesting, chaotic sometimes.
We'd be there until 4 o'clock in the morning, Adrian.
Exactly. Yeah. We would be there for several days on some of these. I think it should definitely stay with the council, with the standards committee. The independent person one I'm interested in.
I'll come back to that.
Coming back to that.
So, we have 76 members, and the thought of, as Councillor Patterson West had said at the previous meeting, trying to determine a standards complaint at full council is unwieldy. It's not. It just wouldn't work, would it? So I think that we are in agreement that yes, decisions should only be heard by the standards committee. Sorry. I'll come to you in a second, Ian. I think that's probably the way that we're going. Unless, Ian, you want to contradict that and come in with some wise words, please.
I certainly don't want to contradict it, Chair. I think if it goes to full council, you've got the danger. I'm speaking, of course, as an outside person. You've got the danger that it might become rather more politicised. One of the credits that I pay to our current standards committee is that although you are from different political persuasions, you come together in a neutral way and you decide on the outcome of a complaint quite properly without any reference to politics. That, I submit, would not happen if we went to full council.
Thank you, Ian. I agree, and thank you also for reiterating our mantra, which, as you well know, when we have our consultation meetings, is the first thing that I say. We leave politics at the door when we come to Standards Committee. So yes, I think monitoring officer. I think everybody is in agreement here that decisions should only be heard by Standards Committee. Although I'm very grateful for the triage service that you provide as monitoring officer as well. Question 8, do you agree that the independent persons and co-opted members should be given voting rights? They have, yes, this is important for ensuring objectivity. No, only elected members of the council in question should have voting rights. I personally, I don't like leading from the chair, but with this particular one, I'm going to, because as far as I'm concerned, the independent persons are the most important aspect of the Standards Committee. They keep us honest. They make sure that we are adhering to our rules, that we do leave politics at the door, and I would be very happy for them to have voting rights. How do my members feel, please? Councillor Canavan, and then I'll come to Councillor Nanovo, and then to Councillor Chapman. Well, thank you.
I think if you'd asked me that question a while ago, I'd have probably said no, don't give them voting rights. But I've been on the police and crime panel now for a bit over a year, and it has independent members, and they do have a vote. So I think actually there is a contribution there, and I've also been mad enough to watch audit and governance, and seen that actually the independent members there do make a contribution. So I think on balance it's probably the right thing. So I agree, Joe.
Thank you, Councillor Nanovo.
Yeah, I was going to say this, something similar, that I think the independent persons having a vote would be a good idea, especially if some committee members were missing and there was an imbalance or anything. It's important to have an outside view.
Thank you. And Councillor Chapman?
Obviously, our independent people are amazing.
I would agree.
But obviously that may or may not be the case nationally. And I just a little bit concerned that if we looked at the lowest bar possible of a standards committee, which is horribly political, and then they get their mate to be an independent person as well, it's just they could use that to swing the vote possibly. If I just worry that, or I'm interested to hear what Ian has to say about it as well, because I just I'm trying to say, by them not having the vote, it almost could keep them honest, because then they're completely impartial. Then it keeps them impartial. So I would be interested to see what Ian has to say about it.
I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Canavan. You must remember that when our independent persons are appointed, they apply for this role. They go through a recruitment. We go through a recruitment process, and having been part of that in my previous life as an officer, we were particularly careful to ensure that the independent persons were truly independent, and that they could bring a certain, obviously independence, but some experience as well, some life experience, and we would never employ somebody to this role that had any political background or anything like that. It is a very robust recruitment process that we go through for the independent persons. The monitoring officer is chomping at the bit to come in here, and I'm sure that she'll back me up on this. Janie?
Yes, Chair, I do want to back you up on that. It is an extremely robust process from my experience also in working across a number of principal councils. It is quite a significant vetting exercise. It's not just someone is nominated and here you go, welcome to the Standards Committee, is quite a significant process, and we do seek references. We do consult with members of the Standards Committee as well, and we have an interview process, etc. Just looking more globally at the comments made by Vice Chairman, the same could be said for elected members as well, who vote if you have a much more political Standards Committee. So there is always a risk as well. So I think you should always place on trust that people will come to the Standards Board with objectivity, with a degree of fairness, with transparency, and always with the highest standards of ethical conduct. I'm an incredible advocate for the principles of strong ethical governance, and I think it's really important that if you come to the Standards Committee, you should come with clean hands, you should come with an open mind, and the members of the public expect everybody who is associated with the Standards Committee to operate with a very high regard of the Nolan principles. And so I think the same should be said for any co-opted person or any independent person that is appointed to the Standards Committee or is asked to support this committee. I think it's really important. We are monitored on that by our stakeholders, for example, external audit, and we do make a comment as well around our ethical governance framework in the annual governance statement on an annual basis, as you know, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Canavan, you wanted to comment?
Well, Jane has covered a lot of it, really. As I mentioned, my only experience of this is through the Police and Crime Panel. So we have gone through a process of advertising, getting the CVs, interviewing, and being fortunate enough to be part of that. So you kind of are able to test, what the caliber of people that you are seeing, and you are able to make a choice, or indeed not make a choice if you don't think any of them are suitable. And so I think that safeguard of that process, I think, allows you some security, really.
Finally, Mr. Sibley, I'd like to come to you. Would you like a vote?
Thank you, Chair. Here I need to speak on behalf of Paul and myself, because obviously he couldn't attend this evening. Grateful, really appreciate the the confidence that you have expressed in our role here at BCP. It's a strange one to answer, because on the one hand, one wants to be seen to be completely independent and therefore not involved in the vote at all. On the other hand, I think it would add to the credibility of the Standards Committee if the independent person did have a vote. I certainly, in my answers given in December when I responded to this questionnaire, suggested that yes, the independent person should be given the vote. But yes, once again, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of you for the kind words you've expressed this evening.
No problem. So I think that we have our answer to that yes, we would support the independent person having a vote. And question 9, am I out of a job? Do we support the committees to be chaired by the independent person? And I'm going to come to everybody else before I give my opinion on this. Councillor Canavan?
What I think is important is that it's a committee decision. So we're not ruling independent members out of the process, that they have a vote, that they will be entitled to be considered to be the chair of the committee. So I'm comfortable with that. What I'm not comfortable with is that prescriptively we are going to make an independent person the chair. I really think it's important for the committee to have that choice, because it's about the trust and confidence, isn't it, of the committee.
Thank you. Anybody else around the table, online? Councillor Pattinson West.
Yeah, I think I do agree with Councillor Canavan, and I think that was a really good point. I think my only concern is it links back to the political wonder if there's something to be said there about how we politically balance the group, or if we should politically balance the group, or if it should be a representative from each group within the council, alongside how we choose the chair. Because I guess it comes back to that issue that I think it's appropriate necessarily for the main group in the council to run some of the committees within the council. But if they've got the higher voting rights in a meeting, then that's often naturally going to happen. So I agree with Councillor Canavan that actually independent people should be able to be the chair. I also think there is something that I don't think it's something that somebody in the main group within the council, the main political group in the council, should necessarily expect to get because they've got higher voting rights. Don't know if I'm actually kind of being particularly eloquent in how I'm saying take up of the committee in its entirety, and how that then therefore would lead to a vote for whoever was going to chair the standards committee.
Thank you. Mr. Sibley.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, just supporting Councillor Canavan's thoughts. Yes, it's a democratic committee, and it's up to the members of the committee to elect the chair, not for somebody automatically to be appointed as chair. It should be down to the members of the Standards Committee.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on this? Okay. I completely. Oh, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, just for completeness, just to say that also I think that the comments that Councillor Patterson West and Councillor Cameron made as well, that I'd also echo. I think the most important thing is about faith and trust, and about how is our committee, how's it perceived by our residents, and if an independent person would be the best person to chair the committee to help us instill that, then I think there needs to be the option of that being possible.
Thank you. Yes, I concur. I think it's very important that it is not prescribed, but I personally wouldn't have any problem at all with either Mr. Cashmore or Mr. Sibley chairing our meetings here. They are modicums of decency and independence, and they, I know, would do a very, very good job. But it must be a democratic decision. But it could be that that is what is best for the committee at the time, depending on the membership. They could be the most experienced people, and I think it's right that they should be able to be considered as chairman of this committee. So hopefully that answers that one, Janie. Did you want to go on to the publishing investigation outcomes? Oh, sorry, Councillor Armstrong, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you. It was just thinking of what you were saying. If there was a situation that we found ourselves in where actually having an independent person perhaps step in to chair a meeting, or, you know, not necessarily having them chairing all the time, but having the possibility of them being able to step in and provide that extra faith and trust, if that was needed in a situation. I think what I'm trying to say is just having that flexibility for them to be able to hold that position or take it temporarily if it was ever needed. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. I completely get that. I mean, for example, we have had issues in the past where the chairman has not been able to chair because they've had an interest. So wouldn't it be wonderful then to be able to pass the mantle over to an independent person, or if you're hearing investigations and you're setting up a subgroup, to have an independent person to be able to chair that. So yeah, I completely get where you're coming from. So I'm hoping that as part of question 10, that our monitoring officer might be able to incorporate some of those views into that. And then hopefully now we can move on to publishing investigation outcomes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So for members of the committee, we're at question 11. This is the government asking whether we should place all details of all complaints in the public domain or not, or just complaints that are upheld. There is no consistent pattern or approach to this up and down the country. Some councils have made a decision already to place all information in the public domain from the start. So, for example, after the filtering exercise, they put a decision notice of next steps containing the details of the subject councillor, where appropriate, the complainant as well, subject to confidentiality issues, subject to sensitivity, and publish all decisions. Some councils only make public investigation outcomes if a code of conduct has been breached. So there is a mixture. This council doesn't do that. This council does not put in the public domain any names of individuals linked with complaints, either on a generic basis, i.e. complaint was dismissed or upheld, and we certainly don't publish decision notices with naming subject councillors where the Standards Committee has upheld a breach of the Code of Conduct. I suspect this, and I think the government anticipate this will attract mixed reviews. But obviously we're seeking Standards Committee views. I have experienced both approaches that appear as part of the yes and the no section in this question. So I don't think there is a consistent practice. This is just open for views.
Thank you. So there's pros and cons for both. So let us consider everybody around this table, you've had a complaint made against you and it was dismissed. Would you want it in the public domain that there had been a complaint made against you? Would you want it in the public domain that actually it was unfounded? Somebody had made a complaint against you, it was unfounded. But is that in itself being made public, pointing the finger? But then you've also, on the other side, if we published every complaint and that was found, say for example, there was Councillor X and there were a dozen complaints made against Councillor X and all of them were found to be not in breach of the Code of Conduct, then that strikes as there being something wrong. Somebody has got a fixation about this councillor, maybe a group making constant complaints, and it's pre-improved that there is maybe a vexatious complainant out there, and you're seeing that these are not being upheld. So there's two sides to this. I think we definitely need to ensure that those cases where wrongdoing has been found are published. But do you want to have everybody named? So I'm going to throw that out to the floor. Councillor Patterson-West, please.
I think it should be
You are breaking up, Rachel, sorry.
Hold on, let me just try my other headphone, see if that helps.
If you turn your camera off, that might help.
Let's see, can you hear me there?
Thank you, yes.
Can you hear me okay there? Brilliant, okay. For me, I think it's really important that it's the gift of the councillor as to whether their name is published if they're not guilty of a breach. I think for me, if somebody's guilty of a breach, then I think that should be published. I think that's been found by the committee and therefore that should be made available. But I think for me, if somebody hasn't breached the Code of Conduct, if they wish that to be made public, that they had a complaint and that they were cleared of it by the committee or they weren't found to have breached by the committee, then that should be within that person's gift to make that public rather than their name to be publicised without any wrongdoing having been found.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Wright?
I would just say no. They shouldn't. The ones that are found not guilty shouldn't be published because people always say there's no smoke without fire and all that sort of thing. And no, it just shouldn't be.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes. I would agree, not published unless you were found guilty of a breach.
Okay, thank you. So I think, Monitoring Officer, we have your answer to question 11. And we are now moving on to requiring the completion of investigations if a member stands down. I've actually had that one as well. That's quite interesting.
So have I. So have I. This is always really difficult. So for the monitoring officer working with the chair of standards committee and the independent persons, this is always a really difficult position. Oh, a cat. It's always a difficult position to be in because is there merit in continuing the investigation? My professional experience has always been it depends on the complexity of the breach that you are asked to investigate or asked to review and look at. So the more complex, the more likely it is that you may pursue as far as you can the code of conduct complaint that you have before you. However, it's a minor one. So, Chair, in the previous question, you made reference to vexatious potential issues. You may then consider it may be that you don't pursue it. I've also had experience where I referenced earlier external audit question. Why did you not continue with this if a councillor stood down? And again, my experience has been it comes down to complexity of the complaint in question, the impact that such an investigation or outcome would have on the council, whether there's lessons to be learned from that, and additional safeguards in terms of review of your governance arrangements to be put in place. So I've had mixed experience of this, and I'm unsure what the answer is to this from my experience, given the views that I've got. So I welcome the views from the committee, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I had a case of a councillor who was being investigated for bullying, and before the decision was made, they stood down as a councillor. The case was then closed because they stood down as a councillor. Then 2 months later at the local elections, they re-stood and regained their seat. And the investigation, somebody's smiling because they know which one I'm referring to, and this was a very long time ago, and they stood in that same authority as a member, and of course the case was closed, so the complainant was most dissatisfied about that, and it did have a huge impact because it was a member of staff who had complained. So these are things that, you know, you don't think it's going to happen, but they do happen and they do have an impact on people. So personally, having seen that, I would be thinking, I'm sorry, but you remember, and it should be published because I've seen the impact that it has had on people when they don't. Councillor Armstrong, your thoughts, please.
I think very similar, although I hear what you're saying, Jamie, about the complexity of a case, but I think if there's also, imagine that there's like a profile, you know, this particular councillor, for example, is like pretty well known in the community, and also what you're saying, Vanessa, about if people then choose to stand again. I think there's something to be said about completeness, and whether that's about someone clearing their name and that being out there and in public, or whether it's about protecting the reputation of the council and saying, actually, we did investigate, they stood down, but these are the outcomes of that investigation, and making that public for the, you know, for our residents to continue to have faith and trust in us.
Thank you. Councillor Pattinson-West.
My instinct is to completely agree with everything that was said there. My only slight concern, and it's not often that I would put finances kind of above anything else, but how much finances we would invest in a situation to get it kind of scrutinised for its completeness, if that councillor is no longer in position, because I wouldn't want to see, as a council taxpayer, I wouldn't want to see all my council tax being spent on pursuing somebody and sending it out for independent review or anything like that, that might cost us a fair bit of money when that councillor is no longer present. That being said, my instinct
remains to say yes. I just think there's a balance to that as to how far that's pursued in terms of time and financial input of the council to pursue somebody who's no longer in post.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to Councillor Chapman-Law and then to Councillor Wright.
Yeah, no, I think if you imagine being a resident who's complained about somebody and it's been pretty grievous, you're going to want to, and there is a chance that they may stand again in future. I think it's especially if you're going to trigger a by-election and then re-stand like potentially a couple of months down the line, then I mean, but as you say, as Rachel said, there does need to be a balance there at the same time, that we don't end up just sort of going down a massive rabbit hole and costing the council loads of money. I think yes, but I think it's probably
And Councillor Wright, please.
I agree with Rachel, what she said, but is there no possibility of being able to pause an investigation so that you don't waste money, so you don't waste time, that you could pause an investigation, and if they did pop back up again, you could restart it? I don't know if that's a possibility.
Monitoring officer?
Depending on the nature of the complaint, there is or there could be possibility to suspend the complaint. The reason why I would say that is because if you are close to parish or town council elections, that person may not reappear as a principal authority councillor, but may become a parish or town councillor either via election or co-option, and therefore become subject to the same code. So you may wish to have, for example, a 6-month suspension to see if that person comes back within the sort of like a public arena in terms of being an elected representative of a body. 6 months is probably usually about right to ascertain if there is going to be a position vacant or a co-option. I think thereafter you're getting too far from the circumstances of the initial event, and I think it just becomes a little bit too difficult to have recollection and to conclude something after that period of time. So there would be that possibility.
Okay, thank you. Rather than agreeing a yes/no to this, then would you be able to summarise our narrative to this question? Thank you. I think that's probably the best way. So can we move on to your introduction, please, to empowering individuals affected by council misconduct? Come forward.
Yes, this is a lot more about the softer impact on code of conduct complaints and how people's experiences around being either the subject member of a complaint, or if, for example, you're an officer that submitted a complaint. Richard and I can complete some of this, for example, 13A, but this is really looking at how comfortable you are in the process, how confident you feel, and if you're a subject member of a complaint, how supported you feel. So it is a requirement of the Localism Act that we offer subject councillors the support of an independent person, but it's discretion of whether that's taken up or not. However, there are limits in that support, so the independent person can talk through the procedure to ensure there's clarity and understanding. But again, question 16 is open for some consultation responses around their feelings of submitting the complaint in the first place, so it's a victim or a witness, for example. So this is a lot more around the softer impacts of the code of conduct procedures.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think as a committee we can answer many of these questions, apart from perhaps number 17, which is, in your view, what measures would help to ensure that people who are victims or witness serious council misconduct feel comfortable coming forward and raising a complaint? I mean, perhaps as a committee we might be able to have a little bit of thought about that. What do you think? Councillor Canavan.
my view about that really is it's not so much about being comfortable in in going through the process to submit the complaint. The thing that I think is the stumbling block, which makes you think several times before you do it, is what's going to be the outcome of this. If you don't think, well, why am I, I'm going to be wasting my time doing this. That's, I think, what puts people off. I don't necessarily think it's about concern about you doing it, the reluctance to doing it. What I think the reluctance is why am I bothering? Because nobody's actually going to take any notice of what I'm going to say. So I know it's not quite the kind of context that this question is setting, but I'm quite happy about raising any complaint anywhere. But I always think, well, what am I going to achieve by it? What's going to be the outcome of it? And that's for me what is the test really.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that. I also feel that in justifiable cases, anonymity must be assured for people coming forward. If there are right reasons for that anonymity in putting a complaint forward and they can justify that, we have to make sure that there are no repercussions for people putting complaints forward, because if somebody is named as the complainant, we need to make sure that nothing comes back on them if that councillor is then found in breach, that that they're not going to then come under any abuse by members of the public or any members of their party or the rest of the council or whatever for having put forward a complaint. And I also feel that one of the measures that would ensure that people feel confident in putting forward a complaint is if the sanctions could actually be strengthened to ensure that if you're putting in a complaint, that the sanctions match that if that councillor is found in breach. Because if it's just, oh, don't do that again, you've been very naughty, send a letter of apology, go for a bit of social media training, it's like you can see why members of the public would just think, what is the point? Because all they're getting is a tap on the wrist. And I know that it is primary legislation that needs to change for those sanctions. But if councils were empowered more to act to the limit of the sanctions which are currently allowed for breaches of the code, I think if we could make them more robust locally, especially when if you can evidence that you have a problem council, and I'm not talking about our council, there are town councils where it is continual, because code of conduct training isn't mandatory. You can't make training mandatory. There's no legislation to support that, and consequently, it's just continual for those councils. So if there was some way to ensure that sanctions could be improved, then that I think would help. I'm going to go to Councillor Chapman. Thank you.
I think. See, my interpretation of this would be somewhere along is people being worried about retribution for making a complaint. Now, I've sort of been aware of stuff over the years where a member has wanted to make a complaint about the leader of their own group, for instance, and they have chosen not to for fear of retribution from their group leader. So how would we go around protecting those people from that kind of sort of retribution?
Okay, thank you. Any other comments that we need to consider? I think Janie's been scribbling away here for that because it is a narrative rather than... Oh, Councillor Wright, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it seems to me there's three main complainants from public, officers and other councillors, I would imagine. I don't think there's many others. I don't know how you would be able to support someone initially coming forward with a complaint, but I think it's got to be known from the first phone call or email or whatever it is that there is support with officers. I'm not clear about the union situation here, but I presume there is union. I know we had a good one in the with the fire brigades union, and that was the sort of support that we had with the unions with officers. With members of the public, I presume it's through the monitoring officers and people like that. But I don't know what support you'd be able to have with a situation like what Adi said, when it's the councillor on councillor, especially if it's your own group. But support, I think, would be the main thing. I mean, what measures is make sure that we have sort of as much support as possible, but making it known to the public that there would be support for the initial decision to make a complaint. I don't, unless you sent a letter to everybody, I don't know how you do that.
Okay, thank you. We move on to section 6, powers of suspension.
Chair, yes. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay.
Yeah, no. If you'd like to introduce the powers of suspension, be gone with you. Yes.
Absolutely. So we start looking at now sanctions, and as everybody in the room is aware, there is no teeth in sanctions any longer. The Standards Committee can encourage, it can actively promote the need for members to adhere to any recommendations coming from the Standards Committee, and indeed it is built into the model code that all elected members will comply with recommendations and code of conduct investigations and outcomes of those. However, whilst it says that, neither the Standards Committee nor the monitoring officer has the ability to enforce any sanctions. So it may be that some elected members, and I have experienced this, never ever comply with a code of conduct outcome with sanctions made by the Standards Committee, and there is very, very little that we can do with that. It's just quite a sad state of affairs, and I think this is recognised by MHCLG, who are asking for it. Many years ago, Chair, you made reference around Standards Board for England when sanctions were mandatory to be followed, and they had a lot more teeth. And there is a question mark around what circumstances will constitute suspension. So you'll see in the commentary around this, there are already disqualification factors put in by virtue of the Sexual Offences Act 2003 and related issues. However, this is more generic really of what constitutes a suspension and who should be the suspending body, if you like. So these next 3 questions look at that position, and then we go on further into this section as well around length of suspensions, other forms of sanctions, and types of behaviours actions that can be taken by Standards Committee or other body, which the MHCLG is also suggesting, around enforcement, around final adjudication and appeal mechanisms, because we're talking now about quite draconian steps. Suspending a person is quite a draconian step because they are elected to carry out a democratically elected function that members of the public had voted for that person, and so therefore suspending them is removing what people voted for, essentially, for either a temporary period or a permanent period. So I think we should just have kind of discussions around these next few questions around sanctions generally, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, and I would like to point out to members that suspending a member, you are actually taking that democratic voice away from residents as well. It's not just the member that gets suspended, the residents suffer because they don't have that representation then. And okay, so we have most of our wards at least 2 members, but don't forget we are thinking about town and parish councils as well. It's not just unitary authorities. That could be the only member that is representing perhaps 2,000 people. So this is a really important question. So the question, first of all, is: do you think that local authorities should be given the power to suspend elected members for serious code of conduct breaches? Yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. Over to you, members. Yes, I've got a yes there, a yes there. Councillor Chapman-Law?
Yes, with the proviso of that the group or surrounding councillors, as you're saying, would then have to take up the slack. So for instance, if a member of a certain party got suspended, then their group would then have to take on the role of the councillor for that ward amongst them. I think that so then you're maintaining the resident representation. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm going to throw a spanner in the works and play devil's advocate and go, well, what if it's an independent member?
Yeah.
What if it's a town or parish council that isn't political? What if they're all independent? So these are, I'm honestly, I'm playing devil's advocate because I think I've seen so many serious breaches, and I think, yes, sometimes it is justified, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Councillor Nanova, then Councillor Canavan.
I'm thinking with some councillors who, who really don't care, suspension might be welcome, because then they can do nothing for 3 months or whatever, and blame it all on the Standards Committee, and that they have been, wronged in some way, and they have a little holiday.
Councillor Canavan.
Yes, I think we should have the power to suspend, and yes, I think it's a Standards Committee responsibility to do it. My conundrum about it is the point that you've just raised, really. If it was BCP, and if it was one of my group that was suspended, I would be saying to you, it's none of your business. I will deal with it. I will provide, I know this sounds terrible, but I'm a machine politician, and that's what I would do. I would provide the constituents in that ward with the representation that they deserve. I would do that. I can't do that, obviously, if it's not in my group, and that's my difficulty. I don't know how we would manage it, but I don't believe it would be appropriate for, assuming it was BCP, I don't think it would be appropriate for the Standards Committee in BCP, and if it was one of my group, to say, we will determine who else should provide constituents with that support. I see it as my job to do that. Sorry.
No, thank you. That you make a very good point. As we are responding to this, please don't forget that we are also responsible for upholding and determining the standards complaints that come in from the town and parish councils. And we do not have political councils as of yet within the BCP area, political town and parish councils. They are all independent. So whilst I would be happy to support the Standards Committee having that power to suspend members perhaps of our own council, I think that very much like we used to back in what they call the bad old days of the Standard Board of England, when it came to that power for town and parish councils, it would be a recommendation to those town and parish councils that they should consider suspending that member, because it would have a different impact for them. Because, for example, like you say, if it's a member that one of your group has been found in breach, very serious breach, and I think that's the other thing. That there needs to be that definition of exactly what is the serious breach. So I think one of the most serious breaches is misuse of council resources, because that's what the taxpayer is paying for. Bullying perhaps as well, but misuse of council resources. If somebody has misused council resources, should they be suspended? Is that the bar where it's set? I think we need to know that would have to be prescribed, wouldn't it? And if it was somebody within our council, fine, because like you say, perhaps your group could pick up the slack, or perhaps the other group members would cover for that constituency. But when it's town and parish councils, when there is no other representation, then it needs to be, I think, that decision needs to be made locally, because it could have a huge impact on that council. Because some of these parish councils have only got 6 or 7 members. So if we as a unitary authority try to suspend a member of a town or parish council, that could really impact that town and parish council. They might even not be able to become quorate in some meetings because they haven't got a person. So are we the right people to then be able to make that decision for those parish and town councils, or should we then recommend that decision to them? So that's my only thought on this. I'm happy to agree with you about the suspension thing, but I just think we've got to look outside of our own arena on this and look at the town and parishes. Councillor Wright.
Yes, I agree there should be suspensions. I just wondered what they would look like if, obviously, a permanent suspension would be gone. Would they be able to then get re-elected again and come back? And if it's a temporary suspension, what does that look like? They're not allowed to go to council or committees, but they're still a councillor, aren't they? They could still go to community groups and represent their area. I just wonder what a suspension would actually look like, and who would make the decision. Well, it probably would be the ultimate sanction. So whether it's standards or full council, but like you say, we're going to be responsible for outside parishes. So unless there's a higher body than BCP. You mentioned something. Did there used to be another body above?
There used to be it was before 2000, before the Localism Act was adopted, 2011, which was 2011. The Act was made but didn't gain royal assent till 2012. Before that, there was the Standards Board for England, and they had. There was much stronger sanctions then. This is really going back to that kind of regime. I mean, as a council now, we do have a sanction available to us that we can ask the leader of a group to suspend or remove a councillor from a particular committee. That is actually within our powers, and a leader would be, I think, and this has happened. A leader, I think, would normally agree with the Standards Committee that if that sanction was imposed, they would remove that. So, say for example, there was a member who had been found in breach of bullying a member of staff who happened to be on our committee. Then that councillor could be removed from that particular committee, or they could be prevented from coming into the council offices. But what we're looking at here is a suspension of members in their role as members, which would probably mean that their laptops were taken away, that they would have their badges removed, and that would be then prescribed by the Standards Committee for a period of 6 weeks, 6 months, or until the next election or whatever. That's the kind of powers that we're talking about now with these sanctions.
With the devolved areas coming in, Wessex and Solent and all the rest of them, would that not be, like I say, a higher body than us to make that final decision? I don't know if there's any standards going to be within the devolved areas. And we used to do it, if it was a higher officer in the fire service, it used to be dealt with by a different brigade. And I'm just thinking along those lines, that the ultimate decision would be a different authority.
At the moment, it would only be if we perhaps would refer that to an independent investigator or an independent body. But when it comes to devolution, well, that's up for debate. Monitoring officer. And Rachel, did you want to say something? Let me just go to Janie first, and then I'll come to you. Okay, thank you.
Later on in the questions, there are questions asking about another body that could be regional, it could be national, it could be local, i.e. it's the neighbouring authority. And if we have another body that makes significant decisions, such as dealing with appeals, because there is a question later around if there is a suspension, should the subject councillor be able to appeal that decision, and who does that go to? So there is a debate about whether it's local, regional or national, and have independence around that. Suspension at the moment is being talked about as a 6-month period, because if you don't attend a meeting if you fail to attend a meeting for 6 months or more under the Local Government Act, you would be automatically disqualified from being a councillor. So the suspension at the moment is for a period of up to 6 months, so that it falls within the Local Government Act around qualification to be a councillor. And as chair, you are correct. Suspension, I think, in this instance would be removal of your ability to act as a councillor. So you wouldn't be given access to meetings. You wouldn't have your council provided resources such as a laptop, mobile phone, name badge, etc. So you would be removed from that. Councillor Canavan just made a couple of comments as well around the group taking responsibility. We also have to be mindful that some political groups don't have that kind of makeup within their ethics framework, and so they act on perhaps different degrees of trust and different ethical arrangements within their political groups. We also have quite a lot of independent groups as well, may not have the same framework as perhaps Councillor Canavan's does. And we also have independent councillors who may struggle to find alternative representation and look to the council to address the needs of residents, and that's addressed under question 20. That's one of the issues raised under question 20, Chair.
Thank you. Rachel, did you want to add to this? You're muted.
Oh, have I not unmuted myself? Can you hear me? You can hear me now, yeah?
Can hear you now, yeah.
Oh, fab, thank you. I think there might be a bit of a delay there. I think it's really important that we build public trust, because I think politician has been kind of lumped into the same group over the last.
You've gone again.
Type it out.
Sorry, you've gone again. Yeah, can you repeat, please? I think we've lost Rachel at the moment. Okay. Hopefully you've got enough there now, Janie, for that one. And if we go on to question 20, I'm also conscious of the time, and we've got 40 questions. Where it's deemed that suspension is appropriate response to a code of conduct breach, should local authorities be required to nominate an alternative point of contact for constituents during their absence, which is what Councillor Canavan has said. Should they be required? And again, this is then putting the onus on the local authorities to provide that for their constituents, or no, it should be for individual councils to determine their own arrangements for managing constituents' representations. So should it be mandatory, or should it be down to the council? Councillor Chapman.
No, because there's too many complexities with the various levels, different types of councils, local with town and parish councils versus, as we've discussed already, with different size groups and independents and stuff. There's too many ifs and buts and everything else. So I think that needs to be decided at a local level.
I would agree with that. How does everybody else feel? Yeah, we're in agreement for that one. Cool. Excellent. Length of suspension. Janie, did you want to say anything, or shall I just carry on?
Chair, I think we can carry on, because I think we're still talking about very much the same views that we've just been expressing. This is around 6 months, or is it a different maximum length that the government is asking around? And should the length of suspension be set by council, or should it be prescribed by the government?
Okay, thank you. So If the government reintroduce the power of suspension, do you think there should be a maximum length of suspension? Yes, maximum 6 months, or something else, or not? 6 months? 6 months? Everybody's nodding. Yep, so as a committee we're agreed, yep, 6 months. Question 22. If yes, how frequently do you consider councils would be likely to make use of the maximum length of suspension? Do we think that it would be infrequently, likely to be applied only in the most egregious code of conduct breaches? Frequently, likely to be applied in most cases? I don't think so. Almost always. I think it's going to be infrequently, isn't it? I mean, this has got to be yeah, absolutely. This has got to be the last resort, hasn't it? And I think as well, I mean, it's if you've got repeat cases as well, you know, if you're always seeing the same names coming forward and it's always the same people, then that's, you know, but yeah, let's hope that, and maybe if you had these sanctions available, maybe it might deter people as well. You know, that's what I'd like to think anyway. I live in cloud cuckoo land sometimes, so rose tinted glasses. The next one is withholding allowances and premises and facility bans. So we've touched on this. We all get an allowance to enable us to perform as members. This is not a salary. I always try to stress that. It is an allowance. So should local authorities to have the power to withhold allowances from suspended councillors in cases where they deem it appropriate? Yes, they should, or no, suspended councillors should continue to receive allowances.
Yes.
We should have the power to remove.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yes, Councillor Wright.
Suspension would be at the end of a process. Would we ever do suspension under investigation?
The sanction would be the suspension, which would come. That would be yeah. So that's the if you want to use it in your police terms, that's your sentence. You have been suspended. You've been suspended for 6 months because you found in breach of the code of conduct has been a serious breach, and the maximum sanction that can be imposed is to be suspended. So would you then want to continue paying that person allowances? No.
I just wanted to make sure that you know that suspension's not used at more to the beginning of a process, and it's suspended under investigation. In that case, my answer might be different.
No, the suspension would definitely be at the very end of the process, having gone through that and found to be in breach, and then all the sanctions considered as to what would be the appropriate measure. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, because otherwise it's just a paid holiday for some people.
Yes, so I think we have the answer to that one. Question 24. Do you think it should be put beyond doubt that local authorities have the power to ban suspended councillors from council premises and to withdraw the use of council facilities in cases where they deem it appropriate?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands online, so I'm going to say that yes, that's what this committee thinks. Question 25. Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. She's shouted yes through our chat. Question 25. Do you agree that the power to withhold members' allowances and to implement premises and facilities bans should also be standalone sanctions in their own right? So rather than suspending somebody, just removing their allowances and their means to be a member, so perhaps their computer.
Same thing.
Yes, or it could be, a special responsibility allowance that's removed. Councillor Canavan.
I think the question is in two parts, isn't it, really? Do I think that we should have the power to, ensure that they get banned from the premises and so on? Yes, I do. if they're continuing to serve as a councillor, I'm not sure on what basis we could withdraw their members' allowance. I think that's questionable in my mind as to whether or not you could do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would find that difficult to rationalise in my head.
Okay, we do actually currently have available to us a sanction to restrict members from the premises. Because, say, for example, a member was found to be in breach of the code for bullying a member of staff. We do have that within our power at the moment. So that's already there. Withholding councillors' allowances, bearing in mind this is an allowance, if they're still being a councillor, I don't think you could take away members' computers, because without their computers, our constituents don't have, our residents don't have a means to contact us unless it's by phone. Our addresses aren't published. So I think some of this we've already got that right to do. I think it's mainly going to be around the members' allowances. And do you agree that we should have that power to remove those allowances? That's always been, actually, when we've sat on standards committees previously, and certainly when I've done code of conduct training, that's always been a question that's come up. Can we just take away people's allowances? And at the moment you can't. That's not permitted. So would you want that as a sanction?
I think that has to come with suspension, and it's almost like the military getting a doctor day's pay or whatever it is if you don't shine your shoes or something. It just doesn't sound right. If you're still working as a council, doing a councillor role, you should still get the allowance.
Rachel, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to see if you can hear me, hopefully. Given my experience on the Standards Committee for the last little while, I do think there needs to be an interim measure between suspension and a complaint being upheld, especially for situations where there are repeated breaches and the failing to engage with the process. Because we've had a number of issues where people are failing to engage with any sanctions that standards have suggested. And I think there is something there that enables us as a committee to have some teeth and actually to implement some sanctions, but also without it reaching a level where you would expect a suspension. So I think they're things that I would like to see in very limited use, but I do think they might encourage people to engage with the process. So I think they're potentially quite important.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer.
I think, Chair, it's appropriate to remind members that if you stand in the shoes of the members of the public, they may view the members' allowances as a form of salary, whilst we know it's not. If you look at your reasonable member of the public, they may view an allowance as a salary, and they're therefore getting paid for alleged bad conduct. So I just wanted to remind the members of the committee to also approach this perhaps from a member of the public's views or the complainant's views.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Councillor Canavan.
Yeah, just on that point, I mean, Jenny's absolutely right, but in a previous life, when I've represented people that have been suspended, almost invariably that's been suspended on full pay. And that's what's in my head. That's what I can't get that out, because I just years and years of having to represent people that have been suspended, but always been suspended and getting paid. But I think the interim thing that Rachel mentioned is kind of covered a little bit in the next section, isn't it?
Councillor Chapman.
Just a quick question for Patrick. So when you're saying surely the suspension with pay isn't the result of the investigation, surely that's like we're just going to suspend you so that you can't cause any more problems whilst we investigate what's going on. So it's under investigation. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask members in the room for a show of hands to question 25. Do you agree that power to withhold members' allowances to implement premises and facilities bans should be stand-alone sanctions in their own right? Yes? 1. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay, so we have a no on that one. So we go through interim suspension. Do you think the power to suspend councillors on an interim basis pending the outcome of an investigation? Now, so this is before the investigation has taken place. So this is very much what Councillor Canavan was saying about suspended on full pay pending an investigation. Do you think that would be an appropriate measure? Yes, powers to suspend on an interim basis would be necessary. No, interim suspension would not be necessary. Or any further comments? Right, no.
Well,
Councillor Chapman.
Sorry, I will be really quick. Sorry. Again, it depends, because if you've got a situation where you've got somebody bullying, then you don't want them coming into the building to potentially bully a member of staff in the meantime. So I don't think suspension in itself is really kind of like what we're looking for. It'd be more a case of sort of banning you from a certain location or contacting a certain person or that sort of stuff. It's more about restricting things to stop them from carrying on doing whatever it is they're doing and affecting those people, rather than actually it's protecting people rather than a punishment. Does that make sense?
So I'm from an HR background. Yes, it does. When you're talking about employees, councillors don't tend to have those day-to-day relationships with members of staff. So if you were thinking about having an interim ban, taking away members' laptops and everything, I'm a great one for believing that people are innocent until they're judged and proven by evidence to be in breach of the code. I think that this is quite a draconian measure to suspend somebody if they've just had a code of conduct complaint made against them and you're going through the process, which we know can take some time, and you want to suspend somebody from being able to interact with their residents and then they could be found not to be in breach. I'm really not buying this one, I'm afraid. Councillor Canavan.
I mean, I agree with you, Chair, that the issue for me is, let's suppose you have an allegation of bullying that has started. So it's going through the process. How do you prevent that individual bullying the other individual again? So somehow you have to create a physical distance between those two people to prevent it happening again. So if it's not this, if it's not interim suspension, which I accept is pretty hard, you have to be able to have the facility of taking their pass away as an interim measure. If it's going to take this length of time, if we think that we need some kind of interim measure, it may not be suspension, but we need to be able to satisfy ourselves that in cases like bullying or harassment, even, heaven forbid, that you be able to stop it and prevent it from happening again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
That would be probably only work if it's an officer. I can't see how that would work if it was a member of the public or possibly another councillor. I agree with what you said, innocent till proven guilty, and I've seen suspension and under investigation weaponised by various high-ups, HR departments, and I just don't like it. It's innocent and proven guilty to me, but I do get your point. But, there is some distance needs to be put between certain cases.
Okay, can we take a vote on this? Those in favour of interim suspension? Against? Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, Janie. Question 27. Do you agree that local authorities should have the, and thank you Councillor Armstrong on the chat there, do you agree that local authorities should have the power to impose premises and facilities bans on councillors who are suspended on an interim basis? So this is going back to, so yeah, we've said no on that one. No, okay. Do you think council should be able to impose an interim suspension for any time period they deem fit? Well, we've said no on that, so that's fine. So we've looked at, no, we're not doing question 29, question 30. And that doesn't apply either because we've said no. Right, so we are then on to disqualification for multiple breaches and gross misconduct. Janie, would you like to take us through this one, please?
Oh, so this is a circumstances where there are multiple breaches and gross misconduct, and here the MHCLG is looking about significant periods of disqualification. It's around linking it in with convictions as well, and certain offences where it prevents you from standing. And really, these are the extreme draconian steps that could then take place. So I think they're quite specific questions. So question 31, for example, do you think councillors should be disqualified if subject to more than one suspension? Yes, think within a 5-year period should result in disqualification for 5 years. Yes, but for different lengths of time and different time frames. If we go with that view, do we have a view on time frames, etc.? Well, no, the power to suspend members whenever the breach of code of conduct is sufficient. And then there is cases around immediate disqualification for gross misconduct. So again, that's relating physical violence impacting on safety of other members and officers. And so these are really extreme forms of sanctions that they're seeking views on, Chair.
Thank you. So, okay, really extreme. When you've been really, 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 really naughty. Do you think councillors should be disqualified if subject to suspension more than once? So let's look at the first one. Yes, twice within a 5-year period. This is quite prescriptive, isn't it? Should result in a disqualification for 5 years. Yes, but for a different length of time or within a different limit, or no. The power to suspend members, and this is, the power to suspend members whenever they breach codes of conduct is sufficient. So this is, rather than a suspension, a full disqualification. Councillor Nanovo.
I don't think you really can disqualify someone because it's, they run for election and they get selected by their party. I mean, I'm talking about, unitary councils, not town councils. But I think that, permanent suspension is up to the electorate, really.
Thank you. Yeah, we've always sort of had this premise of disqualification is by the ballot box.
Or the internal machine.
Councillor Canavan. Councillor Chapman-Law.
I think if you've got a situation where somebody is abusing, certainly a member of staff, an officer, where it may not necessarily be that well known within the electorate, being able to, I think in extreme situations, I think maybe it is something that should be there, but maybe not quite. It should be the absolute last resort. They're being, abusing the same member of staff for years, and it's. I think it needs to be there somewhere, but a long way down the line.
Let's not forget that currently, we do have a disqualification if somebody is found guilty of a crime and is sentenced to 3 months imprisonment or more. That is an automatic disqualification already. So if you're talking about somebody physically attacking somebody, then it becomes a police matter anyway when that happens. Obviously, you know, there are suspended sentences, and it has to be 3 months in prison. That is the minimum. Suspended sentences don't count. So if it was a ABH, would they get a suspended sentence? But I mean, we're looking at semantics here. How are you feeling about this? Do you feel that there should be the power to disqualify members, or should this be down to the electorate? Councillor Wright.
I think there has to be an ultimate sanction, which that would be, bar the law, police and that. But I also agree that the public residents elect us, and they should. What happens in Westminster if with MPs? If I know it is it? They get the whip taken away. They're independent, and then but they can't be sacked as such. But they can be deselected.
Well, if they're in prison,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And if they went to prison, then they are disqualified.
Right.
And they can be suspended, I believe, as well, can't they?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, I agree there needs to be an ultimate sanction, and sort of for us, that's it, to be removed. But I also sort of think that it should somehow be down to the electors. But
Okay,
how that would work, I don't know.
That we're mainly in agreement that disqualification is maybe a step too far for this, a breach of the code of conduct, because if it was that bad, it would be reported to the police, wouldn't it? And then that would be taken out of our hands as well. And there is always that suspension that we've just agreed that we feel that we could be suspending up to 6 months anyway. During which time, if it was that serious, there would be a police investigation in any respect. So, okay. So, we are now looking at, is there a case for immediate disqualification for gross misconduct, for example, in instances of theft or physical violence impacting the safety of other members and or officers, providing there has been an investigation of the incident and the member has had a chance to respond before a decision is made? Yes or no? This isn't just a case of, 6 points on your licence and then you get another 3 points for speeding kind of thing. This is gross misconduct, as would probably be considered in employment law as gross misconduct. So along those lines. We're very pensive in here at the moment, lots of thinking going on. Any views from online on this one? Gross misconduct, disqualification as a member? You're muted at the moment, Rachel.
Oh, there we go. I think I put a couple of bits in the chat there in that in regards to 31 as well as 32, that for me, I think if somebody is being suspended on multiple occasions and or has gross misconduct, then I think it's right that it would go to a by-election for the public to then have their say again. I think if the amount of impact for somebody being suspended is on multiple occasions is going to be quite huge to the business of the council, because we're talking kind of serious breaches if suspension is a last resort. So for 31, I was suggesting possibly yes. But I also think if it's gross misconduct and we're looking at employment law, then we're looking at the ability of the council to perform its job being significantly impacted, and or the safety of people, whether that in whatever way that might look, being impacted. We're talking really significant impact on the ability for the council to do their business. So therefore, for me, I do think there needs to be an immediate disqualification process in order to manage that, so the council can continue to do the work that we need to be doing and the public would expect us to be doing.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Canavan.
Yeah, it's saying something very similar actually. I think from a residents, from our public perspective, they would expect in these sort of situations that those actions would be taken, and then that they would have the opportunity to go to the ballot box and to choose who they want again.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Canavan?
Yeah, I think that the key thing in 32 is that provided there has been an investigation, and that therefore the disqualification is the consequence of that investigation. It's a punishment, if you like, as a result of that investigation. So I think it is a sanction because you've been through due process, and that's been the outcome. So I'm comfortable with that. Even though I've represented too many people who've been sacked for gross misconduct, but there you go.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer.
Chair, I don't know if this is a timely moment or not, but very recently there is a district councillor who appeared in front of the Exeter Magistrates Court, and he was charged with persistently making use of public communication network to cause annoyance, inconvenience and anxiety and harassment without violence. And this was a councillor's persistent and repeated behaviour towards the head of paid service and the monitoring officer of the council, to the point that the Chief Magistrates Court said that the councillor had bombarded the CEO of the council. The monitoring officer was told that she was a disgrace to the human race. He'd acted corruptly and dishonestly, and he received a 12-week custodial sentence. And there is commentary within this article as well that has been circulated, that the Standards Committee did everything they could and upheld a complaint, but obviously the sanctions weren't significant to prevent the behaviour. So it's only very recently this week being reported that this incident has occurred, but that may be an example, for example, of how extreme the behaviour is around attitudes and behaviours towards, for example, officers. I just thought it may be worth mentioning at this moment in time, because it is quite rare for a councillor's behaviour to be reported and dealt with by the Magistrates Court.
Okay, thanks. I'm convinced. Immediate disqualification for gross misconduct then? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Janie, would you like to introduce appeals?
Yes, given the sort of extreme levels of sanctions that we've just been discussing around suspension, disqualification, etc., then does in the rules of natural justice need to be, it is considered, some form of appeals mechanism, so that the subject councillor who may have had this sanction issued against them has the right of appeal, the right of challenge, and for their voice to be heard. So the government here is interested in views around some form of appeals mechanism, and what the council's views on that. Should it be independent? Is it timeframes around an appeal mechanism? Who should hear the appeal? And then we go on into section F, and you'll be pleased to know towards the end of the consultation document, whether there should be a national appeals body or something different, such as an internal appeals body. And so this is very much looking at the far end of conclusion and the outcome of sanctions.
Lovely, thank you. So, members, should councillors have the right to appeal a decision to suspend them? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Right, in that case then, should suspended members have to make their appeal within a set time frame? Yes, within 5 days of the decision. Yes, but within a different time frame. Or no, there should be no time limit. I think there's got to be a time limit, hasn't there?
That just have to say 14.
Halfway, 14 days.
Oh, come on. 14.
Well, what if they're on holiday? Yeah? How about within 28 days?
Yes.
within 28 days? Yeah, okay, we've got yeses coming in. Councillor Wright.
That would be to start the process, not to have everything materials they might want to have, but to start the process of appeal.
That's lodging the appeal within 28 days. Councillor Canavan.
Sorry, Chair, that's far too long. Far too long. If you've been suspended, you'll be looking to put that appeal in straight away if you've got any brain. So, on holiday, forget that. The 5 days is ample, in my view.
I think that is.
I've got an answer for this one. How about if we said yes, and it should be locally agreed, rather than prescribed by government? It can be locally agreed by each council as to what they feel is an appropriate length of time.
I've got one.
Councillor Chapman.
I want to disagree with you. Unfortunately, I have to agree with Councillor Canavan. If you it's an email they have to send. It's like, I want to appeal this, please send. It's.
Are we convinced, members?
14 days. I just think you might want to be consulting advice, solicitors, that sort of thing, and that's not necessarily quick in 5 days. I don't know, but it just seems quick to me.
Monitoring officer, help.
Oh, I'll try. So with my other hat on as the chief legal officer, in a court environment, you are given X number of days to indicate whether you wish to appeal or not. You can use that period to then either withdraw your appeal or when the appeal mechanism is triggered by you saying yes, for example, within the 5 days, you are then usually subject to a number of directions that appear or sort of timeframes in terms of submission of supporting evidence, listing sort of like future hearing dates and housekeeping sort of timetables to get you to the actual appeal hearing, because it may be that the complainant also has the right to express a view. So there would have to be some time frame after, say, the 5 days for that complainant to respond. Chair of Standards or whoever made the ultimate decision, the Standards Committee, may need to submit a view in that, and the monitoring officer may have to collate a kind of a plethora of evidence for some form of appeal body to consider afresh all of the information that it considers. So I think I'm with Councillor Chapman Law and possibly Councillor Canavan. I think if I heard him correctly, that the 5 day period is indicate an intention whether to appeal or not. You will then have to have more time in order to submit all your evidence in support and the reasons why you want to appeal.
Yes, thank you. So looking at the question, it does say, should suspended members have to make their appeal? This is not indicating that they wish to make an appeal, but to make their appeal within a set time frame. Rachel, I'm coming to you.
I just wanted to make the point that if somebody has been through a situation where they have had a level of suspension, that's going to have quite an impact on their mental health potentially. And I just think we need to have a level of flexibility in the timescale so that they're composed enough to be able to indicate that they wish to appeal. So whilst I think I fully agree with the points being made that it has to be limited to some extent, I do feel that 5 days feels quite short for somebody to be getting their head around the result of some sort of a hearing and then being ready to say, actually, I've got the capacity to stand up and continue to fight this. I don't think that was right. So just thinking on that basis that 5 days does feel quite short. So yeah, I definitely think there needs to be a limit. I think 28 days is probably too long. But I do think just a few days to compose yourself and be ready to actually say, I can continue to pursue this. I don't think that's right. It is kind of potentially quite critical for some people.
Okay, Councillor Canavan.
Well, I think you're right, Chair, in the sense that it depends how you read to make. the appeal. I read that as to submit the appeal, because as Councillor Chapman Law says, all you have to do is press the button on an email. So 5 days is ample in my view. I'm just kind of casting back to the days when I used to do this for a day job. People would phone me up and say, I've been suspended, what should I do? Or words to that effect. And my first question would be, have you appealed? And you know, so that would be the first thing, and you don't have to say anything at that point other than I want to appeal this decision, and then there is then the process kicks in after that, doesn't it? So this doesn't go into the narrative of what an appeal might look like. This is about what we mean, or what this means by to make the appeal. If it's just submission of the appeal, then 5 days is ample, in my view. If you're talking about, you know, a full-blown appeal hearing, then obviously we would need quite a lot longer than that.
Okay,
and actually, sorry, Chair, and to be honest, 28 days wouldn't even be long enough. I've known people being suspended for a very, very long time indeed. So before they got to their appeal stage. So I'm just trying to keep it simple by saying, at what point do they need to, how long are they going to get to submit their appeal? 5 days seems fine to me.
Okay, those in favour of 5 days? Apart from Councillor Canavan. 14? Okay, we'll go with 14. Sorry, Councillor Canavan. And Councillor Patterson-West is leaving us. Thank you very much, Councillor Patterson-West, for your time tonight. We are on the home straight. I'm going to go to question 35. I'm conscious we had a long night last night as well. Do you consider that a complainant now should have the right of appeal when a decision is taken not to investigate their complaint? I have one no, I have one yes. Another no. No jeering from the cheap seats.
I go yes.
Yes, so we have 2 yeses and 2 nos. Councillor Armstrong.
I think I'm going to go with a no, because I think I'd like to think that if it's got to that point and it's been properly looked at, you know, that we've got faith and trust in the process up until that point. I think we could just keep going on. Some people don't like the outcome. I just can imagine things in certain situations just going on forever, you know, until people get the outcome that they think they want.
Thank you. Yes, I feel that this has the ability to become vexatious, to become onerous for officers. So I think I'm going to have to go with no in this case and split the vote. Okay, thank you. So the next one is, do you consider that a complainant should have the right of appeal when an allegation of we've done that one, haven't we? Sorry, we've done that one. So we're 37 now. If you answered yes to either of the previous, have I missed one, Richard?
I think they're slightly different. 35 is around not to investigate. 36 is to dismiss a complaint. I think you'll probably got the same view. But
thank you. Yes. So do you consider that a complainant should have, that's why I'm thinking I'm reading the same thing again. Do you think the complainant should have a right to appeal when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld? So the first one was when we're choosing not to investigate, so when it's dismissed, and the second one is when it's not upheld. And we have a no, and again, yeah, so we'll go with no on that one. Question 37, if you answered yes, so we didn't, so we've finished that. So, potential for a national appeals body, question 38. Do you think that there is a need for an external national body to hear appeals? Yes an external appeals body would help to uphold impartiality, or no, appeals cases should be heard by an internal panel? Councillor Canavan, you're hovering.
Internal. I've still got scars from national appeals bodies, so I really wouldn't want to go there.
Thank you. Members? Councillor Chapman? And then, and then I'm going to go to Mr Sibley.
It's only a quick, Chair. I just think the Standards Committee has such an unbiased approach to everything. I don't think that it should go to a national body. It should be done internally. Maybe not the Standards Committee, but certainly within in our case, BCP.
Thank you, Ian. Looks like we could have some more work for you as well then. Councillor Chapman.
I can foresee a situation where if you've got a standards committee that is incredibly biased towards one party, and you've got a complaint that's against the opposition party member, where they're just going to have no chance of having a fair trial, effectively, maybe potentially no chance of having a fair trial, and just. I think there does need to be somewhere else that can hear a case in that situation where, a member has been completely just rickrolled into a complaint which is just not fair against them. Sorry, that's really rambling.
Okay. Okay. Fine.
Yes. Sorry, I would agree that an external body would be a good idea for appeals, just in case, because, we are judging a standards committee by our own standards committee, which is very non-political, very important, but we don't know what other committees around the country will be like.
I'd like to think they'd all be like ours. We could be held up as a bastion, but who knows? I'm afraid I agree with Councillor Canavan. I think it should be. I don't think there should be an external body. I think that this becomes onerous. We'd end up with quangos. It's going to cost a fortune. Yeah.
It would be council tax, I
I don't think we can answer that one then, because I think we're split on this one, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, so our final question is around public sector equality duty. And in our view, would the proposed reforms to the local government standards and conduct framework particularly benefit or disadvantage individuals with protected characteristics, for example, those with disabilities or caring responsibilities? And the answers are, it would benefit individuals with protected characteristics, or it would disadvantage individuals with protected characteristics, or neither. Neither. They're all agreed. I am amazed. Thank you so much, committee, for bearing with us. I'm sorry that we've run on a little bit longer than I'd hoped to. 8:30's not too bad. But I think that's been really, really worthwhile. And I'd like to thank our monitoring officer and deputy monitoring officer for their assistance with this, and also to our independent member and to our democratic services officer for your patience and your minute taking as well. Thank you, members. This is the end of the agenda. Thank you to anybody who's persevered and has continued to watch with us, and thank you to our members of the public present tonight. Good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, as an independent person, can I praise